Aside from actual stealing of money, there are three other types of direct money theft that can happen in a business. And these, like you said, Gwen, these are more common, right? So one would be inflated hours and expenses. And the second, I think, is personal use of business resources. And the third is being grossly inefficient with how you're using tools, software, resources that the company has bought. Are you feeling overwhelmed, stuck, or uncertain about how to grow your business without sacrificing what really matters most? Welcome to The Business You Really Want, the show for women ready to build a sustainable, fully aligned business. Aligned with what, you ask? You, your values, your life. Seriously, it is possible. I'm Tanya Kubo, and along with business advisor extraordinaire Gwen Bortner, we're here to show you how. By the time you notice the money theft, the energy and time theft have likely been happening for months, if not for years. So today we're going to conclude our series by talking about when small theft actually becomes big financial loss and why the number on your P&L is just the tip of the iceberg. And, we've talked about energy theft, which is kind of the basis of all small theft, the death by 1,000 paper cuts, as it were. We've talked about time theft and, money theft is the end game. In fact, Gwen, you are the person who I heard first say that very few people who are later found to have embezzled funds ever started their theft by stealing money. Would you kind of just paint a picture for how you see the mindset of the person who at some point ends up actually stealing money from an organization?
Almost always it's I deserve it is where we get to, right? It's typically the person who thinks they're working more hours than what their pay is justified, or they're providing more value than their pay is justified, or they think they should have gotten the raise that they didn't get, or they think they should have gotten the bonus that wasn't delivered. It's all of, I feel like I am owed this. Mm-hmm. Because we think we're owed it, then we don't feel like it's stealing because it's what I deserve for the thing, right? And so I think when we really talk about truly hard money theft, we're going to talk about things that actually lead up to hard money theft. But I think once we start getting into hard money theft, that really is embezzlement, is truly, lines are clear. This is absolutely illegal, mm-hmm. to be doing that. I rarely has someone come in and said, this looks like someone's not paying much attention. I could totally get a whole lot of money out of here. That's not the way most people come into a business as an employee. Now, does that mean no one does? I also don't think that's true. There's probably some folks that actually find jobs that they know that they can tell. It's like, oh, this is a place I can totally, start mm-hmm. embezzling money. Like it's a plan. But I think that's a tiny percentage of the folks that ever actually do true, hard, direct money theft. And what I'm going to really call embezzlement, stuff that really is absolutely illegal. There is no line. There's no grayness that, if anyone said, they would say, oh yeah, that's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so let's just say that obviously actual theft of dollars and cents, taking the money from the cash drawer and not depositing it in the bank as you're supposed to do as a closer and taking it home and using it to buy groceries, right? That is actual stealing. Aside from actual stealing of money, there are three other types of direct money theft that can happen in a business. And these, like you said, Gwen, these are more common, right? So one would be inflated hours and expenses. And the second, I think, is personal use of business resources. And the third is being grossly inefficient with how you're using tools, software, resources that the company has bought.
Yeah. And I would say grossly inefficient with intention.
Yeah, intentional.
Some people are just grossly inefficient. And that's really more into the time theft that we were dealing with in the prior mm-hmm. episode. But there's a point that I'm being grossly inefficient with intention. That's when I feel like it's money. It's really money theft.
Right. So let's start with inflating hours and expenses. How do you see that usually play out, and why is it a problem?
Well, and we talked about this some in the time episode as well, but it's where I'm supposed to be an hourly employee, and so I'm supposed to be recording the amount of time I work, but I padded an hour because I think I'm super efficient. And so anyone else, it would take 7 hours. So I need paid to be paid 7 hours instead of 6 hours, if that's what it took me. And so we're actually getting paid for hours that we didn't work. Now, if you're on a salary, that there's a whole different set of rules that apply to that. But that's usually not where this is happening. This is usually happening on the hourly employee who actually is turning in a number of hours. And maybe they're contracted to work 8 hours a day, but they aren't. And so even though they're contracted for 8, you're still supposed to record what are the 8 hours that you worked. But if you really only work 6, that's not 8, right? Like I said, if you're actually supposed to be tracking your hours, a salaried, position is a different thing. Most of the folks that we're talking about here, that's not the situation. That is a different piece. Same thing if you're looking at billing hours. Like, are you really working that hours? Now, you may have some agreements in place. I'll say the classic, attorney agreement is I bill you a minimum of 15 minutes regardless of how long, we talk, right? We talk for 5 minutes, you get billed for 15. That's in the agreement. That is not theft because that's what you know. If I'm going to pick up the phone and talk to my attorney, I'm going to get billed for 15 minutes, even if it's a 3-minute conversation. Okay, fine. But that's more of the exception than the rule. So doing the same thing, saying, oh, I'm going to hop into their email real quick, but I'm going to bill them 15 minutes for it just because I hopped in. Did you really need to hop in, or did you just hop in so that you could bill a chunk of time? And were you supposed to bill 15 minutes, or were you supposed to bill the 5 minutes that you were in, right? All of these are places where that time becomes a bit of an issue. It's also the place where you say that I clocked in at 8, but I didn't really clock in. I didn't really start working until 8:45. The classic that folks will talk about is like, I clocked in at 8, but the first thing I did is I went to the bathroom, and then I got some coffee, and then I had a couple conversations with a few friends. And so that's another theft of time, because most of the time, if we're hourly employees, we're supposed to start working. Now, not that we don't get to have a bathroom break, but really, if we just got to work, we probably should have done that at home before we left. Not as the first thing we do as we come into work, unless we're actually kind of having an issue this particular day, not as practice. Right. So all of those, I think, are the places that we start seeing some of this time piece. And then the problem is when I am billing for 8 hours and not really filling 8 hours, then when someone needs me to do something more, I want to charge overtime. Where in fact, there were still 2 more hours, using the 6 and 8 hour example that we've been kind of playing with. There was actually 2 more hours to get the work done.
Yeah.
So now I'm not only charging for hours that I'm not working, I'm charging time and a half for hours that I didn't need to be charging time and a half for. Right?
Right. Yeah. And I think, and some of these things kind of play out differently on industries, right? So, I think of like back in my college days working in fast food where, they tell you, okay, well, you're without authorization, you're not allowed to clock in more than 10 minutes earlier than your shift starts, and you have to clock out within 10 minutes after your shift ends. And, when you don't know any better, there are people who think like, oh, well, that means that I should clock in 10 minutes early. Like that makes me a good employee, right? Clock in 10 minutes early, clock out 10 minutes late. And, because you're 18, 19, you don't really think of the ramifications, but that's 20 minutes extra a day. And even on, if you're only working 3 days a week, now we've got a whole extra hour of pay happening. And maybe you worked it and maybe you didn't.
Right.
But
That's where it becomes the issue of, were you actually working those hours? Those extra minutes? Or were you there, like you said, I'm just here so I'm efficient, but I don't actually start until the top of the hour, using your example. And, we had a client who just was recently talking that she realized that payroll was up from a previous month. And she realized it was these little 15-minute increments, either at the beginning or the end of the hour. And she's like, I don't think anyone really needed those.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I think that's where it comes up, right? Because I think of...
And I'm sure in this case, those folks aren't thinking about the stealing, right? They're not thinking of it as stealing, but man, all that stuff adds up over time, right?
Right. Well, exactly. And it's like, I think like in the case of fast food, usually like where the time clock is, like there's not a place to dawdle for 10 minutes before your shift officially starts, right? You clock in, you start working, but there's also an issue, even if it's just 10 minutes, of having too many people on the floor, right? Like you're all tripping over each other because it's a small space or whatever. So that's like an area where you can think of where what may look, maybe well-intentioned even, is problematic. Let's move on, though, to personal use of business resources.
So, this is an interesting one because if you're an employee, right, inevitably there's some amount of personal use of business resources. Like all of us have taken home a pen.
Pens in your purse and
Pens
Post-it
in your
notes.
purse, paper for various things. I mean, I'm just finishing up a pad of paper from Ernst & Young that has the Ernst & Young logo on it. I haven't worked for Ernst & Young in 30 years, right? So it was one that was, in a file that I was working on and whatnot. And when I stopped working there, I did not go through everything in my entire existence to find this particular portfolio that had a pad of Ernst & Young paper in it. I didn't probably find it for another 5 years after I had left Ernst & Young.
Probably.
Right. So, there are those kinds of things. Absolutely, for sure. And there's also I've got to call my doctor because my doctor is only in the office between 8 and 5 while I'm also at work. And oh, by the way, I have to take lunch between noon and 1, and that's when they take lunch and I can't, so there are some of those things that go on, but it's back to how big, how much, how often, right? Are we dealing with it? I know of a story. This wasn't a client, but this was in a previous situation where, and I think it was back when I was at Ernst & Young, someone was basically running copies of their book, back because this was before PDFs and all the rest of it. They were doing this very, self-published book kind of thing long before self-publishing was a thing. And they were running copies on the printer at the office.
Of a self-published book.
Of a self-published book. Because they weren't publishing that many copies. It's only like 10 copies. It's 10 copies and it's, and it's like, well, it's only a few pages. It's a tiny book. It's only 75 pages. I'm making the numbers up, but something like that. And it's like, yeah, that's a ream and a half of paper plus all of the ink. And back then, the leases often were based on how many pages got processed.
Right.
Right? So it wasn't just the ink and the paper, but there was also a lease cost to the printer itself, and of course, even if there wasn't a lease cost, there's a wear and tear. It's like, yeah, that's not appropriate. That's right. That's taking resources. And kind of the other side of it is people will say, oh yeah, no, I just use my work email for everything. It's like, well, you haven't actually paid for your work email. And then some of those same people get really upset when the work environment, most of our folks are not in big enough environments probably for this to be a problem. But as someone who ran an IT department with a husband who runs an IT department, it's like, you don't have ownership of anything that's in that email is the company's property. Right. But that also means that you shouldn't be using it for personal things. Have I ever sent a personal email to my husband on his company email? Absolutely. Of course I have. We all have. but I don't make it the practice. He has a personal email that most of the personal things go through. When I do send something, it's usually urgent. He needs to see it right now. And I know the only way he's going to see it is because he's not looking at his personal email during work hours.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So,
right.
So these things about, what are these pieces? And then you can get to the other side of it, which is, do you run expenses through the business? Now, it's one thing when you're the owner running expenses through the business. You can make, there's things that you can legally do. IRS allows you, all of that's fine. But what I've seen happen, especially in small businesses, is employees see what the owner is doing and they think that gives them authorization to do the same level of thing. And first off, no, it doesn't. And second, it may not, the deduction that the owner is taking may not apply to you because you're not an owner.
Right.
Right. So the lunches, the mileage, the expenses and whatnot, there can be a whole lot there that is misappropriated.
Mm-hmm.
And if we aren't careful, it's really easy for those to slip by.
Right. And as an owner, I mean, this is where, some of these are gray areas, right? Because, do I personally care if one of my contractors uses, well, I'll tell you, I had a team and, I have like an info@ email address. I don't want to check that email address ever. I don't ever want to look in that inbox. So technically speaking, I don't actually care what my customer service person does with that inbox until they change, until they leave. And then I'm now responsible for that inbox that gets 80 emails a day that have absolutely nothing to do with my business. Right? Because now I have to take my time to go through and unsubscribe from all those things, right?
And that also means that they were potentially doing all of that personal work on your time.
Right, potentially. But honestly, I care so much less about that than I do about my time that is now spent cleaning up an inbox that's not even mine, when I barely spend the time I need to clean out my own inbox. Right? So those are the things where it seems micromanagey on the front end. What does it matter? But it's you really do have to mentally kick the can down the road on these sorts of things and recognize that in many cases, you pay the price one way or the other. And so your point is, it's okay, so if they're using their work email for all of this personal correspondence, then how much of that time that you see them sitting at their desk is time that they were working versus personal correspondence? You have no way of knowing. I mean, yes, there's tech. If you're into tech spying on your people, sure. Most of us aren't, though. We're not talking about that kind of
hard to deal with. So no one's really going to.
Well, it's just micromanaging.
Yeah.
It's nobody wants to be that kind of micromanager. Nobody wants to work in that kind of micromanaging environment. But other ways that I've seen it play out in offices is I worked in an office environment at one point where you would just write what you wanted on a Post-it note on the supply closet. So, if you wanted a particular type of pen, you would just write that. Well, we had an admin for a period of time who took everything on that Post-it as a directive. So I would write, say, red pens, right? Because I was doing a lot of hard copy edits. Somebody else had a preference for a particular brand type of pen. And so they would write, well, she would see that they listed their particular type of pen. The pens they wanted were $20 a box. Meanwhile, I just want a red pen. I don't care, right? Well, suddenly, the boss is wondering, why are the office supply expenses going so far up? Well, come to find out, the admin was actually ordering each of us our own box of pens. Versus going, okay, Gwen, I see that you like a fine point pen. Tanya, you like a fine point pen. This set of pens, $7 a box. How many pens do you go through in a month? Okay, a box of pens lasts us about 3 months. Okay, great. We're going to buy this one box. Oh, no, no. Everybody got their own box.
Wow.
Same thing with Post-it notes. She was ordering, somebody's like tiny Post-it notes. So she would order a set of tiny Post-it notes, set of big ones, right? It's just because she was not appropriately trained. But I want you to just imagine what our supply closet looked like for several months with all these very niche little products.
Well, and the thing that what I thought you were going to go with this story is where people were putting things that are supplies, but they were getting them and then taking them home.
Well, I mean, yeah, like if your work pens are much nicer than your home pens.
Right? I mean, like that's where I thought you were going to go. And I've seen people, I've seen people do that. That it's like, oh, I need this thing. I'm gonna, I'm gonna order it, and then it ends up, at home. We've seen all the movies where, at some point someone's arguing about like whether or not this is your stapler or it's the company stapler, right? But the reason it's funny is because there's truth in that,
right?
Right?
Right. Exactly. And we also
this is
have
my stapler. It's like, you didn't buy that. It is not your stapler.
Yeah. And we have like issues with, business vehicles. Somebody will say, okay, I'm going to go pick up this thing. Can I take the company car? And while I'm out, I'll take my lunch break too. Internet. I don't think using company internet's as big of a deal or as big of an expense now as it used to be. Software for personal activities, back in my journalism days, back to your example of a self-published book, right? You may not want to pay for Adobe InDesign yourself because back in the day it used to be like $1,800, right? So you're going to like use your company's InDesign account to do your book. And maybe you clear that with your boss. Your boss is okay. Maybe not. But back to like, there's nothing wrong with you as a boss saying, I don't care if my employees do that. Totally fine. It's just to be aware of these are things that can either directly steal money because, I mean, think of like Adobe nowadays, right? You're paying for a certain number of licenses. You're paying a certain amount per month per seat. And if you're paying for 10 people to have access to it, but actually only 5 people really need it for their job, then the other 5 people are using it like once a year, that doesn't make sense. What else would you say? Because I feel like we sound like we're really like nitpicky bean counters, but to me, this is just a matter of getting the business owner to think critically about where their money goes.
Well, and I think it's the other side of that. I like the licensing one as someone who's done licensing and, of course, been in the IT world, a huge long time about it. A lot of folks will be like, oh, well, we don't really need to pay for this other license. And it's like, well, do you or don't you? And because one of the other side of this is, are you training your people to take advantage and steal, do the soft steal, right? And then one of my favorites is seeing folks that would do things like, well, we're only going to buy one license, although 5 people really are using it, like
right.
a lot, right? But they're playing that game, and then they're upset when someone does the same thing to them. And it's like, well, why is it okay for you? Well, it's because Adobe's big. We're going to keep using Adobe as the example. It's like, they weren't always big. They started out tiny too, right? And it doesn't make it okay. So that's, I think, another thing when we start talking about this is, are we being consistent and making sure that we're representing? So, I talked about, things that I can do as an owner that you can't do as an employee. But part of that is making sure that, do people actually understand what the difference is? Because most people follow other people's leads, right? So are you using the company card for absolutely everything? Someone way back in my history, like every meal went through the company, which is absolutely not appropriate. I mean,
no,
100%. Could he play that game? He absolutely could play that game. I'm not the IRS. I'm not chasing him down.
right.
Right. But he would freak out when one of his employees would actually take a client to lunch, which it actually is a legitimate expense. And it's like, so what are we actually teaching them, right? What is the teaching that we're actually trying to do? And when we go through that, that's when it becomes really obvious that sometimes we are training people to be bad people financially, because that's the lesson that we're giving them. So I think that's the other half of this equation that we have to pay attention to as well.
Yes, exactly. Well, and it's funny you bring that up, because I had a situation, and this is just bad bosses. Really is what this is. So I needed to interview somebody for a story for the business, and I had been trying for 3 months to pin this person down, and their boss would not let them take work time. Was like, well, you can meet with them lunch break, before work, or after work. And they lived out of town. They were like driving a 2-hour commute. So they were not interested in meeting with me after work or before work. So I went to my boss. I said, hey, if we do this over lunch, can I just buy them lunch? Because I'm only going to get 15 minutes with them if they still have to go eat their lunch. And my boss was like, no, their boss needs to pay for their lunch. This helps their company as much as it helps us. Okay, but who wants the story and who doesn't? Obviously, their boss doesn't care about us writing the story, because they're not willing to give them work time to do it. So, like, the least I can do is like drop $15 and buy this person's lunch. But like, my boss was like, well, if you think it's so important, you should buy them lunch. And I'm like, okay, but back to who really wants to write this story? It's not really me. Like, I don't care.
Right. Yeah, I don't care.
Right?
I work here.
Right. And I think, really, and I'm being funny, because I just think it's important to point out that there are bad bosses just like there are bad employees everywhere. But the mindset that I think goes into a lot of what you're talking about, which is really the focus of the episode, is it is really easy as an employee, especially if you aren't somebody who's entrepreneurial minded and understands the difference between being an employee versus being an employer, is you can very easily convince yourself they can afford it. It doesn't matter. What's 10 more copies at 2 cents a copy?
Right.
Right? Well, nothing once. Times 200, it's a little bit more. Times 2,000 over the course of the year, which would not be hard to accomplish. Then it's extreme. And, times that by 20 people in a, say, 2,000 employee operation. I mean, our clients are not that big, but then it gets even bigger. But I think we all are on a very slippery slope when we start making decisions for what other people can afford.
Right. Whether we're doing it for our own company against somebody else's company, or whether we're doing it as a, employee, kind of person for what my employer, and I'm using that term loosely because it could be who has contracted me to do some work, can afford or not afford, right? It's very much a perception thing. And like I said, part of this is, are we actually inadvertently training folks to behave poorly? Right? Are we holding a double standard? I think that happens more often than we think it does.
Right. Well, and it's like, this is also like kind of another example of the company can't afford it, or, and I know you see something because you work a lot with retailers. You'll see an abusive discounting.
Let's go to abuse of discounting, because this is a biggie.
Oh, and this is a biggie for our retailers who are listening, definitely. And so I'm going to give you a slightly related example that we've talked about, and then I want you to go into the meat. So one thing, this is something that I think everybody listening can identify with, is Starbucks. So Starbucks has a very generous refill policy for people who are part of their rewards program. So inside the store, as long as you don't leave the store, you can get a free refill on coffee or tea if you're a rewards member, right? So you order a coffee, you order an iced tea, a hot tea, whatever. And you go up and you're like, I'd like a new tea. They scan your card, it's free. Otherwise, there's a nominal refill fee. It's like $50 or 50. Ha ha ha. That's a very expensive refill. 50 cents.
Welcome to Starbucks.
Yeah. It might be $50 nowadays. I've been a rewards member for a long time. 50 cents, maybe $1, whatever, right? Well, I happened for about a 3-year period of time, I worked in an office that was located in a plaza where there was a Starbucks. And so I would go there and, I'd get an iced tea in the morning and I'd maybe sit there for an hour. I'd get a refill and then I'd go back to the office. Well, one time I was there and I ran into somebody I knew and he was walking in with an empty Starbucks cup. And he was standing, he handed it over and he was like, I'd like a refill, please. They gave him a refill. And I was like, I didn't know that you could get that if you left. I thought it was only in the store. And he was like, oh no. He's like, for those of us who are regulars, as long as you can bring them in a cup, he's like, it's fine. So really you just have to buy like one a day and then just bring it in. And I was like, huh. And so then I asked and they were like, oh yeah, for you, Tanya, we'll do that, right? Not telling me like, no, that's actually not the policy or anything. So I was like, oh, well, that's nice. Well, then the change in ownership and they'd have a sign. They're like, refills are only free for rewards members as long as you stay in the store. And I was like, oh, new bummer, right? Like, okay, not a big deal. Go back to what I used to do. Well, they weren't honoring it. So then pretty soon the sign said, and this means Bob too, which was the person who told me about it, right? Because Bob was like, this doesn't apply to me. And all the staff members were like, well, surely this doesn't apply to Bob, because not one person who worked in that store knew of a time where Bob was paying for refills. Like, right. That's how long this had gone. And granted, iced tea, coffee, pennies per serving, right? But I would have been paying for my refills as I should have all along. Had Bob, because it's always Bob who gets the standard discount. Everybody thinks it's just Bob, but Bob's the one telling all of his friends that just do what I do. Tell him I said it was okay. Is Bob the owner? No. Okay. Now that is my example. I just think it's highly entertaining.
But it's a great example because someone somewhere told Bob it was okay the first time. Mm-hmm. I don't know who it was. Could have been the manager of the store at that time.
3 managers ago.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Could have been an employee who really probably didn't have authority to do that. Right. Mm-hmm. Maybe there was a special thing that they did, for a week that created it. And then Bob's like, well, but you did it last week. Will you do it this week? And they're like, oh yeah, I'll do it this week. And then the next week it's like, well, you've done it now for a couple of weeks. You're just going to keep doing it. I mean, like, it's one of those things that just snowballs, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no telling. Because like you said, we don't know how it started for Bob, right? But this is one of those things. It doesn't feel like it's that big of a deal. Well, I'll just give you you're a friend. I'm just going to give you a 10% discount. It's like, but is it your money to give the 10% discount? The answer almost always is no, unless it's the owner. Mm-hmm. But the problem is when the owner gives a 10% discount, then and doesn't talk about it to everybody else, and someone else saw it, they think, oh, well, if they're a good customer, if they're a regular customer, they put whatever context they want around the situation. Oh, they bought 4 coffees, so because if someone buys 4 coffees, they can get a 10% discount. I mean, yes. There's no telling, right? You put your own story about why that worked, right? Mm-hmm. If it's not clearly explained why it worked. Well, the reason I'm giving them a 10% discount on, we're going to keep with coffee for today, since that's the that's the example. The reason I gave them 10% discount on coffee is they are a friend, and I happen to know that their mother died this morning. There could be this huge long list. It was really just a one time thing, but all of a sudden, if you haven't given all of that context, mm-hmm. people are putting their own piece around it, and now they think they have authority to do that. And only the owner has authority to do that, which if you're in a corporation like Starbucks, that means that only from the head offices can you be doing that, or the franchise owner. I don't know. I can't remember if Starbucks franchised or not, but whoever actually has ownership authority can be making those decisions. And we've seen in smaller businesses where a manager, not an owner manager, but a manager, started giving huge amounts of discounts to the people that they liked. And it literally closed the business.
Well, and so here's what I want you to talk about, because this is probably not going to apply to every listener, but I think there's a good lesson here, which is margins. So this is part of that. If you're an employer who's not entrepreneurial minded, or an employee who is not entrepreneurial minded, and you're wearing owner pants because you think you deserve to, or it's not a big deal, or the business can afford it, you actually don't know actual cost of goods sold. You don't know the margins that the company is working on. And sometimes, and I've seen this happen many times, and I remember being young and dumb as well. I remember, again, back to the fast food days when our manager got like really, really particular and wanted us to go back. You're supposed to weigh the fries order. Each size is supposed to be a certain weight. And she wanted us to go back to weighing the fry orders because we had all this food waste. And it's like seemed so silly. It's like, what is that? Plus or minus 10 French fries. But I did not know what the supply order was. I didn't know how much money we were making off of each order of French fries. We could have made 50%, could have made 10%. What would I know? So yeah, it seems silly for me because I didn't have all the context. But, in your case, Gwen, with all of this retail experience, I mean, talk about what that real cost is on even what appears to be a small discount. Let's just say a 10% discount.
Most products and most businesses in what I'm going to call typical retail are generally running somewhere around a 50% cost of goods, which means when it sells for $2, $1 has already been spent a long time ago to get that product sitting on the shelf. And these days, rarely is it $1. It's $1.20 or $1.10 because you have to pay for the shipping and, and there's all sorts of other things that go with it. And that doesn't include any of the labor to unpack it from the box, put it on the shelf, do all of the other things that go with it. And so the margins are relatively thin. And it may feel like, well, 10% isn't that much. But now what you've said is instead of making $1 or possibly 90 cents, we're now making 90 cents, maybe 80 cents on this same product. And it's like, what do you mean? We can't possibly only be making that much. Well, yeah, most of the time that's true. And the problem is most businesses, with all of the other expenses, the cost of the physical space, the the employees going on, the electricity, all of the other things that go on, a 50% margin is a really, really tight margin. And a lot of the folks that I come into, what they've gotten in the habit of doing is trying to follow what I'm going to call the sales cycle of like Macy's or,
Amazon. Or
Amazon,
big box.
Any of these big players. And the thing is, they are ordering at different quantities and sizes, so they actually get different rules that they're playing by, which
different
margins change, and they're designed to be able to take on the discount. And a lot of the businesses say, like, I just don't know why we're not making money. We have this great sales number. And what I look is, yeah, but your cost of goods is running at 65%. And when we dig in deeper, it's like, oh, because you're always having these sales at 10% off. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, but people won't buy if it's not discounted. It's like, well, then you got to raise your prices if you're going to discount it. Yeah. And it's like, well, but we can't do that. And it's like, well, then it's not going to last long term, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's a place where if we get in the habit that everyone should be able to buy on sale, that's another place that we train our employees. In this case, most of the time at retail environments, they're employees. That's where we train our employees that everyone should get a discount.
Yeah.
But that's not really how most retail businesses run.
Yeah. So
expect to walk into Chanel and get a 10% discount.
No, you don't. And, it's like a 10% discount at Chanel
would be huge, by the way.
It would be huge.
That's
the other piece, I think.
Right? And oh, by the way, they probably have better margins. They probably can actually afford a 10% discount, but they don't. Right? So this is that whole of what I deserve, right? We're only going to keep this customer if we give them a discount. How much is the customer actually making you any money? Probably not, because you're losing money in the process, and it's money that's leaking, right? It's not stolen necessarily, but it's totally leaking. And back to, if you have not authorized it as an owner, then it's inappropriate. One of the other places that we've seen that's similar, and this is back with physical product, is when someone says, "Oh, I'll just give you free shipping." If that's not policy, if it's not around, a policy that the company has decided to do. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. It's just, it's a tiny thing. We'll just put it in a next day, mail thing from, USPS.
Like a flat rate mailer.
And it's like, well, it's not that big. It's a flat rate mailer. It's like, yeah, it's still $6.
Right. Well, and this is exactly. And this is the point, right? These things add up. And, as a business owner, part of it is if you run a product-based business and you don't have a solid read on your true cost of goods sold, you actually have no idea of how much money is walking out the door with an employee that is over discounting things or inappropriately extending discounts. That's the first thing. The second thing, though, I think is also important is proper cash handling procedures. This is something that we have talked about. It's like,
I want to give two things here.
Okay.
There's proper, and they kind of tie together. They don't completely tie together, but they're related. So proper cash handling procedures of making sure that, the cash register balances, if it doesn't, it's at an agreed upon amount, that the right people know that it hasn't balanced, because sometimes we just give the wrong change. Sometimes, it happens, right? But let's make sure we aren't, giving back $100 bill when we should be giving back a single dollar bill, right? Did we actually give them, 3/4 when we should have given them 2? The world's not going to end over that. Unless it's happening a lot, then that becomes a different problem. But are we making sure that the money that came out of the cash register either went into the safe and came back to the cash register or went to the bank, whatever those procedures are? And that piece that ties into this that a lot of folks miss is you've got to stay on top of your bookkeeping. So not staying on top of your bookkeeping is the easiest way to have money be leaking out of your business. And it can happen for a lot of spaces. So, for example, if you're not staying on top of your bookkeeping and you aren't reconciling your bank accounts and really knowing what all of those charges are that are either coming in on your credit card, on your debit card, into your bank account, the ACH, the whatever, you can have fraudulent charges happening that you don't know about, right? You can have non-fraudulent charges that people are making that they shouldn't be making, right? So not fraudulent like, the spam someone's gotten your credit card and now they're using it inappropriately, but it could be an employee who's using a card inappropriately. You also could be paying for services that you're no longer using if you're not actually reconciling your account. I've recently been changing over bookkeepers for an organization that I work with, and we realized that there were a couple things we're still paying for we shouldn't have paid for the last 6 months. Now, luckily, these are relatively small amounts, but that's money that was lost. It wasn't stolen.
Right.
No one did anything wrong, per se, but because we weren't paying attention to all of those pieces, that's money that's gone. And we can't get it back because it wasn't a fraudulent charge, right? But you can have fraudulent charges on there. I came across someone who realized that their bookkeeping was 6 months behind. Well, a lot of times, if you don't catch a fraudulent charge within a reasonable period of time, you can't get your money back on it. And the other thing that you and I both know, because we've both experienced it in our personal lives, they'll put little tiny charges through first to see if they get caught before they put in the big giant charge. And when the money's gone, it's hard to get it back, even if your bank or credit card is going to do it. They may get it back to you, but it may be months. That can really damage your cash flow. So really staying on top of your bookkeeping is one of the best ways to make sure that the money isn't leaking.
Yeah. And that's ultimately what this is, right? Because it's not, in many of these cases, this isn't like file a police report sort of stuff. This is just little leaks that add up over time. And also, when an employee has been doing this sort of behavior for a long period of time, it feels like you can't reprimand them, right? I mean, it's hard to come to somebody and say, I should have caught this 6 months ago and I didn't, but you can't do this and these are the reasons why, and not have them be very confused. Because if it's such a big deal, why didn't you catch it 6 months ago? Or like, if you would have told me 6 months ago, I wouldn't keep doing it.
And you still need to deal with it at the time.
Yes,
because
exactly.
The ones who don't is when it's like, well, if they don't care about this, they probably won't care about the next thing.
Right. Or, they back into our Bob situation, they tell all their coworkers, this is how things operate around here.
Exactly. Oh, just ask for the preferred customer discount. And so it's like, oh, well, I've seen them give the preferred customer discount to other people, so I guess I give them the preferred customer discount because they know to ask for it. Problem. So the biggest thing, and I think, when we've talked quite a bit about retail because I think it's an easy place for the money to slip, but the bookkeeping is the key. Stay on top of the bookkeeping so that you actually know where the money is going. Because that's true for any business, whether it's retail, whether it's service-based, whether it's in-person, whether it's virtual, it doesn't matter. To make sure that you really know where the money is going at any point in time, because it is easy for it to slip over time. And the only way to see trends is to be staying on top of it month by month by month by month by month.
Yeah, exactly. And I love how you bring it all back to the bookkeeping, right? Because you can't control what the people you trust in your business do, but you can control how long behaviors go unchecked. And bookkeeping is one way to do it. So, and it's probably the best way. So in looking at the whole series as a whole, how I would sum it up is that boundaries and systems are what help you prevent and correct energy theft. Measuring people's productivity and having accountability measures in place are your best way in protecting and preventing from time theft. And then monitoring the finances, staying on top of your bookkeeping, reconciling your accounts, actually paying attention to the payroll or to the subcontractor expenses is how you protect the dollars and cents from walking out the door intentionally or unintentionally. Would you add anything else to that, Gwen?
Nope, that is the perfect summary. That just wraps a nice little bow on it.
All right, so the bottom line here is that small theft can kill your big business dreams. Like I said, it's not dramatic, okay? There's no front page news story about a lot of this, but it's the death by 1,000 paper cuts. And so if this series or even this episode has helped you to recognize patterns in your own business, if you are seeing how energy, time, and money theft might be happening right under your nose, you're not quite sure what to do about it, just know you don't have to tackle it alone. The hardest part about these issues is having objectivity, is moving away from thinking, how can these individuals do this to me? How can this happen to me? To recognizing that people do different things to benefit themselves. And so seeing the situations clearly and for what they are will help you address them effectively. And you can do that in a clarity call with Gwen. All you have to do is go to everydayeffectiveness.com/clarity. You can talk about your situation with Gwen. She will help you identify what the root causes of the situation, how it's impacting your business, and then you can discuss next steps. So again, go to everydayeffectiveness.com/clarity and get that book today. I know Gwen would love to chat with you. Thanks for tuning in to The Business You Really Want with Gwen Bortner. I'm Tanya Kubo, reminding you that sustainable success is within reach. Make sure to subscribe to the show and visit thebusinessyoureallyWant.com for more resources. Until next time, keep dreaming big and acting with intention.